I absolutely love the way anamorphic footage looks. I love the tall oval bokeh and the way the autofocus area is rendered. I love the unique horizontal lens flares, and I love the wide aspect ratios that come with the anamorphic territory, letting you see so much more of the scene. But anamorphic lenses are also usually manual focus lenses. And I'm usually a solo run-and gun videographer, so manual focus isn't always an option for when I'm shooting. And that's why this announcement was so exciting. This is the Sirui 40mm f1.8 1.33x anamorphic lens built for APS-C sensors, and this, my friends, is the world's first autofocus capable anamorphic lens. Hey, what is up guys? 𝗙𝗣𝗧𝗏 here, and in today's video, we're gonna be taking a look at everything about this new Sirui 40mm f1.8 anamorphic autofocus lens. Everything from its build quality to its image quality to its autofocus performance, all while taking a look at a ton of sample footage shot using this lens. And without any spoilers, I've got good news and I've got bad news. As a disclosure, Sirui is not sponsoring this video. However, they did send me this lens to test and review, but they have no input into the content of this video, and all opinions are my own. And with that out of the way, let's jump right into it. Let's start off with build quality. The lens itself is relatively compact and lightweight when compared to traditional cine lenses, measuring in at around 5.5 inches by 3 inches and weighing in at about 1.5 pounds or about 600 grams. The build quality feels above average with a nice finish on the lens housing. The lens features both a geared focus ring and a geared aperture ring, but of course the focus ring drives a fly-by-wire focus system, so you won't be getting a linear manual focus experience with this lens. The aperture ring can be switched between click and declick depending on your use case. The lens also features an autofocus manual focus switch as well as an autofocus lock button. On the front of the lens, you'll find a 77mm filter thread for use with screw-on filters and adapters, while the housing itself sports an 80mm front diameter, which can be paired with a clamp-on matte box system. On the lens mount, we can see a typical rubber gasket for improved weather and dust sealing, and there's also a USB-C port to allow for firmware updates to address any issues that may arise to help future-proof this lens just a little bit, which was actually super important in addressing some of the autofocus issues I had with this lens, but we'll talk more about that in the autofocus section of this video. Overall, the lens has an above average design, and I didn't have any notable issues with the physical build quality. So let's talk about the fun stuff, image quality. Starting with a good old sharpness test, you'll see that this isn't the most clinical or sharp lens out there. Centers are serviceably sharp and corners maintain detail, but this is a far cry from the type of image you'd get out of a Sony G Master lens, which for a lot of people interested in anamorphic lenses, this comes out to be more of a pro than a con if your ultimate goal is to get a lens that has character and renders a unique looking image. Chromatic aberration is another artifact that's quite pronounced with this lens, showing that typical purple and green fringing in the out of focus elements. I saw this in both the controlled test footage as well as in the real world footage in high contrast areas of the frame. On the other hand, vignetting and distortion is managed quite well. Looking at the test chart shot, there's not a lot of noticeable light loss in the corners, and there's only a mild amount of barrel distortion happening in the center of the frame. All in all, this lens delivers a pleasing image with some quote-unquote dirtiness that adds unique characteristics to the image. Now, let's talk about lens flares. You either love them or hate them, but this is definitely one of my favorite features of an anamorphic lens. I have the blue flare version of this lens, but you can also get it in a neutral flare variant as well if you prefer the horizontal flare streaks to take on the color of your light source instead. In general, the lens flares are pretty intense on this lens and will wash out your image if you have a bright light source shining directly into your lens. Overall, if I'm choosing an anamorphic lens for a project, it's because I'm looking for a stylistic look and not a clean look, so I'm a fan of this lens's horizontal streaks and the way it handles light sources. But I will say that I'm not the biggest fan of the ghosting artifacts. If in a future version of this lens, Sirui is able to suppress that specific piece of flare, I think this lens flare would be my favorite of all the lenses I own. Bokeh also looks really nice wide open at f1.8. Thanks to that 1.33x anamorphic squeeze factor, we get these taller oval shaped bokeh balls instead of the typical circles you find in spherical lenses. It's the way that anamorphic lenses vertically compresses the out of focus areas that make me love the look of the image, and this lens is no exception. And before we move on to the focus section of this lens review, let's take a look at some sample footage first that we got with this lens. Alright, and now we kick off the portion of the video where we talk about all the things that disappointed me with this lens. Starting with the minimum focus distance, which is about 60 centimeters. This isn't a bad minimum focus distance per se, it just means you won't be able to get super tight close-ups, but it's still more than usable for most cases. I just wish it was a little bit closer. Focus breathing, on the other hand, may be a bigger letdown for some people because this lens has some pretty intense amounts of it. As we rack focus from close to far and back, you'll notice that the field of view shifts quite significantly. Now, for some, this might make this lens unusable for certain types of work like VFX, and for others they might just straight up dislike the look of focus breathing as it can be kinda distracting. But I also offer a counter argument that it's yet another layer of character this lens has, and it's more of a subjective issue than anything. But for this next section, I think we can all agree that it's no longer a subjective issue and it's more of an objective issue, and we're talking about autofocus. Throughout my testing, it felt like I was kind of back in early 2010s shooting on a Panasonic GH4 again because autofocus was so inconsistent and at times just straight up didn't work. I tried a bunch of different tracking tests messing with Sony's autofocus transition speeds, and regardless of whether I set it on 1, the slowest transition speed, to something in the middle like 4, or the fastest transition speed at 7, it just straight up didn't work. Now, this is really weird because it did work pretty well in stationary scenes when I shot a dialogue-driven short film a few weeks before these tests, and once the autofocus was kind of established and locked on, it did a good job at keeping the talents in focus even with small amounts of movements in the scene. And again, it works quite well in these close-up sample shots we got here as well. I also texted a few friends who I knew had this lens as well to see if they were experiencing these issues and whether or not it was just like an issue with my copy of the lens, and my friend 𝗖𝗛𝗟𝗥𝗦 actually let me know that there was a firmware update available for the lens which actually was meant to address the autofocus issue, so thanks to that USB-C port on the lens mount, I was able to update the firmware on the lens. After the update, the autofocus did work significantly better than my first attempt, being a lot stickier when I was walking around and away from the camera, even running at a faster pace up to the camera. Hey, editor David here. Guys, I am so conflicted about this lens, and this autofocus situation is driving me nuts. So ever since I did all of the original autofocus tests, every single time I've been like, am I being too critical? Am I going too hard on this? So I keep reshooting my autofocus test, and for some weird reason, it's like kind of incrementally better each time I do it. And this time I did it, it was able to track me extremely well. Granted, the lighting condition was very soft, front lit, you know, it's the easiest opportunity for the camera to autofocus. And the one limitation I am running into now is that when I as a subject am like, you know, 20 feet away from the camera, it no longer focuses on me and just kind of defaults to focus to infinity. And my guess is that the camera, the Sony camera specifically, is having a hard time performing autofocus with a squished image, because I can't understand why this would be a lens issue per se, and this might just be an artifact of autofocusing with a squished image, which is something that hasn't really been done yet inside of at least Sony cameras. It's okay, it's not that bad, it's just inconsistent. I don't want to be overly critical of this, but I also don't want to, you know, not give you guys this information that I'm finding as I'm continuing to test with this lens. And the last thing I want to talk about is autofocus noise, which there's a lot of, and I'm not even going to tell you about it, I'm just going to show you. This might be the most excessive setup I've used for YouTube. So let's talk about what I think of this lens. There was a lot to like and a lot to be frustrated at, and the question is, should you buy this lens? And the answer is Maybe. I went into this review super excited because I absolutely love the look of anamorphic footage, and combining anamorphic plus autofocus just seemed like, you know, a match made in heaven. On top of that, the image quality and the build quality coming from this lens is pretty freaking great. I'm a big fan of it, and it only costs $800, which when you compare that to manual focus anamorphic budget lenses, it's not that much more expensive. But when it comes to recommending this lens, I feel like there's a big group of people I cannot recommend this lens to. If you shoot live events, things like weddings or sports, things where you don't get a second chance to get your focus right, things where you have to rely on the focus being both reliable, consistent, and also smooth, I don't think that this is the lens for you. But that's not to say I don't recommend this lens at all, just that if you do want to get this lens, to understand all of its limitations and drawbacks right from the get-go, so you can start working around those limitations and take full advantage of this lens. I think this lens is really well suited for those like myself, like solo digital creators, people who are in front of and behind the camera very often. Because when you're in front of the camera like I am right now, it's really nice to be able to just walk in front of the camera, sit down, and just know that the autofocus is picking you up and you're not fiddling with manual focus, making sure that you're in focus. That's a huge quality of life improvement. And when I'm behind the camera, it gives me options to run a really lightweight autofocus capable setup on something like a gimbal. And if you know, the autofocus misses or it does something wonky when I review the footage, I can always go back and reshoot that shot. But again, I have to go into it with the mindset that I might need to reshoot my shots because the autofocus is a little bit inconsistent. So I guess that's my conclusion. The answer is maybe. I'm a little bit disappointed from the inconsistencies in the autofocus performance. I do think that later models of anamorphic autofocus lenses that come out, whether it's from Sirui or from other brands like 𝗙𝗟𝗟𝗢𝗪, that they're gonna just keep getting better. And I'm excited for where the future of this sub-product line gets to, because I'm really excited for it. As it stands right now with this lens, I would say it's a fun lens. I really like it, but I don't know if I would be that excited to use it in a professional setting. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this, make sure to get subscribed for more content on the latest camera gear news. And let me know in the comment section down below on what your thoughts are on this autofocus anamorphic lens. And I'm gonna leave you guys with the full run of the short film that we shot using this lens. Let me know what you guys think of that as well. And as always, I will see you in the next one. Peace.
Mal pal.
What happened to the new Liz?
Hi. Sorry, but look, new Liz brings us coffee, which I think more than makes up for being 10 minutes late.
15.
10, 15, whatever. Still an improvement.
Asshole. All right, get in here.
God, I missed you, Tiny. Or is it Madam Tiny Esquire now?
Oh, no, you know, it's actually Your Highness, Lord Almighty, Attorney at Law, Tiny, Esquire. Thank you very much.
Duly noted. So, you can bail me out of trouble with that fancy title now, right?
Trouble? You have literally never done a single wrong thing in your life.
I don't know. A lot can happen in a year. You heard me. I jaywalk now.
You idiot.
Really though. I mean, sure, I don't do anything illegal. You know my fear of authority. But that doesn't mean I haven't done anything wrong in my life.
Elizabeth, you are my moral compass. I mean, how many times have I called you when I screwed up? Like, really screwed up and needed your help.
Yeah, but I mean, look at us now. You're a lawyer. A lawyer, you freaking did it, man.
I did the damn thing.
You did the damn thing. And now you have the damn thing that you always wanted. And I am so beyond proud of you, Mal, because I know how hard you worked for this. And wow, I mean, now you're here in life. And I am just Nowhere.
Whoa. Okay, first of all, here is a hellhole of debt, grunt work, and being bottom of the pecking order, and that, yeah, it's like also my literal dream come true, but it's not, I don't know, there's no magical here to get to for me or anyone. And secondly, you're not nowhere, bitch.
Right, because I'm in this same parking lot that we'd spend hours in high school just because we had no money or creativity to do anything else. And wait, why are we here again?
You know, that is not what I meant.
I know, but it's truer than any way you could have finished that thought.
You're genuinely delusional, you know?
I love your pep talks. Do go on.
Nowhere? Oh my God, lady, you are everywhere. I mean, the places that you've traveled to and the things that you've seen and done. Come on. Plus, would you really be happy just being one somewhere? You know, having just one thing?
You're right, I guess. I mean, I do contain multitudes.
I swear to God, I will slap that glibness straight out of your mouth.
Glibness?
Yeah.
Since when did you start stealing my words?
I don't know, I just thought if I used one of your words that maybe you might listen to me for once. Okay, I am finally the person giving good advice here, so just let me have this.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you. I mean it.
Anytime. You know, I'm not technically a lawyer here in Florida. Want to get into some trouble? Come on.